The Congo Mineral Maze. How Washington engineered peace to win the battery war while the world fixates on ceasefires and casualties. There's one critical dimension to the Democratic Republic of Congo crisis that 99% of observers are completely missing. The perfect storm no one saw coming on June 27, 2025, as foreign ministers from Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo signed what media outlets hailed as a historic peace agreement in Washington. Most observers focused on the humanitarian angle. 12. Thousands dead, hundreds of thousands displaced. The M23 rebels finally agreeing to lay down arms. A feel-good story of American diplomatic triumph over African chaos. But this narrative misses the most crucial element of what just transpired. The largest strategic resource grab in modern history. Disguised as peacemaking when we flip the lens. The real architecture of peace, the agreement signed that Friday wasn't primarily about ending violence. It was about restructuring global supply chains for the next century too. The so-called critical minerals for security and peace deal represents a masterclass in strategic patience, where Washington allowed a conflict to escalate precisely to create the conditions for intervention that would grant access to an estimated $24 trillion in untapped mineral reserves too. Consider the timing. The M23 rebels, backed by Rwandan forces, launched their most aggressive offensive in early 2025, capturing the strategic cities of Goma and Bukavu 34. This wasn't coincidental. It happened just as the Trump administration was implementing its most aggressive China containment strategy, including 34% tariffs on all Chinese imports and export restrictions on critical minerals. 5. The silent winners, who's really celebrating the United States. From mineral dependency to dominance, while humanitarian organizations rightfully focus on the 6.7 million displaced Congolese. 3. The real winner emerging from this crisis is Washington's long-term strategic position. The peace deal grants American investors unprecedented access to Congo's mining operations too, effectively breaking China's stranglehold over critical mineral supply chains. China currently controls over 80% of global cobalt refining and has invested $10 billion in DRC mining compared to just $2 billion in U.S. foreign direct investment. 6. The peace agreement potentially flips this equation, giving American companies a pathway to the source while China loses influence at the extraction level. Technology giants. The invisible beneficiaries, the companies that will profit most from this peace, aren't military contractors. They're the technology giants whose entire business models depend on cheap, reliable access to cobalt, lithium, and rare earth elements. 6. Companies like Tesla, Apple, and Microsoft never appear in peace negotiation photos. Yet they're the ultimate beneficiaries of any arrangement that stabilizes and cheapens their supply chains. Arizona-based Evolution Energy has already announced plans for America's first commercial-scale cobalt refining facility, expected to begin operations in 2027 and import directly from Congo. 6. This represents the beginning of a fundamental reshuffling of global supply chains that most observers are missing entirely. European Union. Playing both sides, perhaps the most cynical player in this entire arrangement is the European Union, which has maintained its Memorandum of Understanding on Sustainable Raw Materials Value Chains with Rwanda, even while imposing sanctions on Rwandan officials for supporting M2378. The EU's strategy reveals the true nature of modern geopolitics, publicly condemning human rights abuses while privately ensuring continued access to the minerals that fuel European industry. EU Commissioner Dubravka Suica explicitly stated that suspending mineral purchases would be self-defeating. 8. Revealing Brussels' actual priorities despite parliamentary calls for suspension. The complete picture, only outsiders can see China's calculated response. Strategic restraint. What 99% of analysts miss is how China has responded to these developments. Not with panic, but with strategic patience. 9. Beijing's quiet shift from neutrality to mild criticism of Rwanda represents a calculated recalibration. Not desperation. China understands that American mining operations in eastern Congo will face the same challenges that have plagued the region for decades. Security, infrastructure, and local political instability. 9. Meanwhile, Chinese companies have spent 2 decades building processing capabilities, refining infrastructure, and downstream manufacturing that cannot be replicated overnight. The real Chinese strategy appears to be allowing Americans to assume the costs and risks of extraction while maintaining dominance in the more profitable processing and manufacturing stages. 5. In February 2025, China demonstrated this leverage by implementing immediate export restrictions on samarium, gadolinium, terbium, dysprosium, lutetium, scandium, and yttrium. 5. Rwanda, the perfect proxy. Rwanda's role in this entire arrangement reveals perhaps the most sophisticated element of modern resource warfare. Kigali has effectively positioned itself as the indispensable partner for any external power seeking influence in the Great Lakes region. 10. The beauty of Rwanda's strategy is its plausible deniability. While UN reports confirm that 1,000 to 1,500 Rwandan troops were deployed in M23 controlled territory as of late April 20254, Rwanda can maintain that these deployments are defensive responses to the FDLR threat rather than offensive operations to secure mining territory. This allows Rwanda to extract concessions from multiple parties simultaneously. Security guarantees and mineral processing agreements from the United States. 2. Critical raw materials partnerships with the European Union. 7. And continued Chinese investment in processing facilities. 9. What no one dares to acknowledge. The conflict economy. The most uncomfortable truth about the Congo crisis is that certain parties have a vested interest in maintaining controlled instability. Complete peace would eliminate the leverage that allows external powers to extract favorable agreements from desperate local governments. The $400 million suspension. Congo's decision to ban cobalt exports for 4 months in early 2025, potentially costing the country $400 million. 6. Wasn't just about price manipulation. It was a demonstration of leverage. President Felix Tshisekedi was essentially telling global markets, "You need our minerals more than we need your money." This suspension forced Chinese giant CMOC Group, the world's largest cobalt producer, to scramble for alternative arrangements. 11. More importantly, it created the political space for alternative partnerships with American companies, which is exactly what the subsequent peace agreement delivered. The infrastructure trap. What most analysis misses is how the Lobito Atlantic Railway, linking Kolwezi to the Angolan coast with American backing. 6. Represents a fundamental shift in African resource flows. For decades, Congolese minerals flowed east through Rwandan and Ugandan routes to Chinese-controlled ports. The new Western Corridor, backed by American investment, creates an alternative that bypasses traditional Chinese influence networks. This isn't just about transportation. It's about restructuring the entire geographical flow of African resources away from Chinese-dominated routes. Historical pattern recognition. Old scripts. New actors. The Katanga precedent. Students of African history will recognize this pattern from the 1960s Katanga crisis, when Western powers supported the secession of Congo's mineral-rich southeastern province. 12. Then, as now, the justification was stability and good governance. The reality was resource access. The current arrangement follows the same playbook. Support proxy forces to create instability. Then position yourself as the peace broker who coincidentally gains resource access through this solution. The only difference is that in 2025, the competition is with China rather than the Soviet Union. The Scramble for Africa 2.0. What we're witnessing isn't just conflict resolution. It's the modern iteration of the Scramble for Africa, with critical minerals replacing the ivory and rubber that drove 19th century colonialism. 12. The players have changed, but the fundamental dynamic remains. External powers competing for African resources, while local populations bear the costs. The sophistication lies in the packaging. Modern resource extraction is wrapped in the language of partnership, sustainability, and peace building, but strip away the diplomatic rhetoric. And the underlying structure is remarkably familiar. The reality behind the information smokescreen, media manipulation, and selective attention, the timing of the Congo peace agreement, buried beneath coverage of other global crises, reveals how information warfare has evolved. 13. By ensuring that Congo remained a second-tier crisis in global media coverage, interested parties could conduct their strategic maneuvering without intense public scrutiny. Compare the media attention given to Congo, where 6.7 million people have been displaced. 3. With coverage of conflicts involving fewer casualties but greater geopolitical visibility. This disparity isn't accidental. It's the result of careful information management that allows major powers to pursue their interests without public accountability. The humanitarian shield, perhaps the most cynical element of this entire arrangement, is how humanitarian concerns are used to legitimize what is fundamentally a resource extraction agreement too. The same powers that allowed the crisis to escalate for months suddenly discovered urgent humanitarian imperatives precisely when their strategic interests aligned with intervention. This pattern, allowing humanitarian crises to develop, then using them as justification for intervention that serves strategic interests, has become the standard playbook for 21st century resource conflicts. Predicting the next move, what's coming that few anticipate, the cascade effect, if this analysis proves correct. We'll witness a cascading series of peace agreements across mineral-rich African regions within the next 18 months. Countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, currently aligned with Russian Wagner/Africa Corps forces, will find themselves facing spontaneous insurgencies that create opportunities for counterintervention. The pattern is predictable. Destabilization followed by externally brokered solutions that grant resource access to the intervening power. What makes this particularly insidious is how each intervention is presented as humanitarian necessity rather than strategic positioning. The technology Cold War escalation by 2027 will likely see the emergence of parallel global supply chains, one controlled by the U.S. EU allied network, another dominated by China-Russia partnerships. 5. Congo represents the first major battleground in this technological Cold War, where access to minerals determines technological supremacy. The implications extend far beyond Africa. Countries will be forced to choose between Chinese and Western technology ecosystems, creating a bipolar world where neutrality becomes increasingly impossible. The environmental paradox, the bitter irony of this entire arrangement, is that the green energy transition, driving demand for Congolese minerals, may prove to be one of the most environmentally destructive processes in human history. 14. The Congo Basin, home to the world's second-largest tropical rainforest, is being carved up to fuel technologies marketed as environmental solutions. Within a decade, we may discover that the environmental costs of mineral extraction for clean technologies exceed the benefits of reduced carbon emissions. But by then, the supply chains will be locked in and the environmental damage irreversible. The 50-year perspective, rewriting the rules of global power viewed from 2075, the 2025 Congo crisis will likely be remembered as the moment when the liberal international order definitively ended and resource-based power blocks began to solidify. The peace agreement signed in Washington represents not the resolution of a regional conflict, but the opening move in a new great game where control of mineral supply chains determines global influence. The humanitarian cost of this transition, measured in Congolese lives, will be remembered as the price paid for technological supremacy in the 21st century. Whether that price was worth paying will depend on who writes the history books. What's certain is that the powers celebrating in Washington today have engineered a solution that serves their interests while ensuring that the fundamental dynamics driving conflict in eastern Congo remain unchanged. Real peace would require addressing the structural inequalities that make mineral wealth a curse rather than a blessing for ordinary Congolese. Instead, what we have is a carefully managed resource extraction agreement disguised as diplomacy, and a precedent that will be repeated across the global south as the new Cold War for technological supremacy intensifies. The chess masters have made their move.